a lot of my we're recording the meeting just kicked in. So a lot of my sales meetings, we go out, we're having these conversations about cloud and different sites. And when I first came to Parallel, a lot of those conversations were around SD-WAN and how it's taken the networking world by storm, and in many cases replacing older technologies like MPLS and then adding features and functionality. Then that conversation naturally evolved as I'm talking to different IT leaders to include, well, what I do around my security focus and footprint. And that's where SASE really kicked in. So we started having more and more conversations around SASE. And Cato, of course, is our partner of choice when we go to that SASE play. So we thought it'd be great to have a webinar, just kind of a Q&A section where you see Jerry and I go back and forth, and we'll talk about what is SASE and these sort of things. So going down to that first question, let me go ahead and kick it off and ask Jerry specifically. Jerry, why don't you help explain what is SASE and why is it such a hot topic? And of course, give us a little background about who Cato is first.
Yeah, terrific. And obviously, Gary, as soon as you mentioned beer, I was clearly willing to join this session. Just a quick background into who Cato is, just for the people that are involved that aren't familiar with us. Cato was started by the two gentlemen you see on the screen here, Shlomo Kramer, who was the original founder of Checkpoint Firewalls, and also then later started another company called Imperva, who does a lot of different web-related firewall security functionality. And
Jerry,
another gentleman
in there. When I first learned that, when we're learning about who Cato is, and being a nerd that I am, and dealing with firewalls for a lot of my career, when I heard Shlomo was the founder, I was like, instant credibility from that security footprint. It's not an afterthought since this guy comes from Checkpoint. Just got to tell you, that's the first piece when I heard about Cato that my ears perked up.
Correct, and you can see, if you look at the center of the screen there, some of the strategic companies that we've venture firms that we've are working with. We've got 332 million in funding so far, and you can see they're from strategic vendors that have funded some of the largest organizations in the world. We've got a strong reputation. We've got over 800 plus enterprise customers today in 100 different countries, 9,000 branches deployed, and over 200,000 mobile workforce users that are currently on our network today. So it's just a kind of a different concept, right? SASE in general is just a different concept, and we'll get more into those details as we progress here. But yeah, just a completely different strategy to the way that the organization is funded, driven directly to the cloud.
Well, I think seeing those your partners there for the venture capitalists, I think they had the same impression of Shlomo that I had, for sure. So let's get into that first question. Sorry, I jumped the gun there. So why don't you tell us a little bit what is SASE and why is it such a hot topic right now?
Sure. I'll start by just giving a little bit of background into SASE, right? So essentially about a little bit over a year and a half ago, some of the Gartner analysts got together and they started talking about some of the different directions they saw emerging from a technology perspective. And one of the things that they identified is that there's all these different components that people today are currently supporting by using different point products. And one of the challenges is as people are adding additional services and as services are moving out of the prem location up to the cloud, it's getting more and more difficult to be able to manage and support all these different products. So there's a variety of different products that are included in the SASE space. The concept of SASE is that all of this architecture is going to be delivered in the cloud. So it's a cloud native function, right? It includes things like SD-WAN, potentially CDN, WAN optimization. Traditionally, we'll incorporate like a global backbone to connect all of these different services together. And where it kind of transitions away from like what you would traditionally get with SD-WAN is you've now incorporated security function, which, as I'm sure you and I, the discussions we've had in the past, Gary, right? Security was kind of left off the map originally when SD-WAN first came out. But as the process started developing, it became a much more critical component. And SASE is the incorporation of that, but all delivered through the cloud. So it's easy, it's converged, it's simple, and it's very, very effective because of the fact that it's delivered through the cloud where you have infinite scale and infinite flexibility.
That's great. So on to the next question. Why do you think Gartner, and we all know, especially as IT guys out there, we all know who Gartner is, they're a big name out there. Why do you think they took the initiative to create the acronym for this emerging technology?
Well, partially Cato likes to take slight credit for that, right? We were in their ear telling them these are the trends that we're seeing and these are the things that we've identified. Uh, we are one of the sample vendors when you look at that specific category, because a lot of the team members on the Cato, we've been doing this for about 6 years now. So we help form this specific architecture. But with that being said, right, again, when we go back to talking about customers' inability to be able to manage all these different solutions that all have separate interfaces, separate management councils that become more and more complex, and traffic is now going all over the place, it's become darn near impossible to be effective from a security perspective at being able to manage it all. One of the interesting things, and I think that gets overlooked a lot of times when we talk about security, is complexity is just as much of a threat as in adding all these different solutions, right? So we talk about intrusion prevention, advanced malware, all these different security components. And the reality is the more complex you make it, the less likely are you're going to be effective at securing it as well, just because of how much complexity you've introduced. So this is taking all those things that are difficult to manage and support, mashing them all in the cloud where I've got scale and I don't have to worry about it, and just making it a much more effective solution that's easy to support and manage, with a team on the backside that is constantly updating it, doing all the legwork, the things that stink that you need to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to all these different security engineers to be able to support.
Absolutely. That's great. That's great. I often think about when we have these conversations, if I look into a server room, again, being a geek by trade, and I think about every box that stacks up that you'd have to do each one of these things, and each one of them takes those ones and zeros, does something with them, sends them to the next box, does something else with them over and over and over, and now it's one product. I got very excited about this technology.
Yeah, it's
So
a flawed process, I would agree.
yeah. So final question before our first beer tasting. So then I think we alluded to this before. So then how did Cato come along, and how does Gartner's, how do they align with the Gartner's definition with the SASE requirements then?
Sure. So essentially, you look at all these different traditionally edge-based, point product-based solutions that are all listed on the left-hand side of the page here, whether it be mobile/VPN, cloud acceleration, cloud security, UTM and firewall components, global backbone, and SD-WAN. We took all of these different pieces. So when Gur and Shlomo got together and they thought through the architecture and the way that the market was going in terms of SD-WAN, they said to themselves, there's lots of different ways to solve this problem, but the incorporation of cloud is definitely the right direction to go. So early in, 6 years ago, they said, we're going to take a strategy where we focus purely on the cloud. We're going to incorporate all these different pieces and have it be written in a cloud native way. So not taking a point solution and trying to modify it and throw it in the cloud and act like it's the same thing as something that's actually architected for the cloud, and do it in a way that's simple, that has a simple and easy to use management. So as the SD-WAN market came out and the quadrant was created, Gartner was struggling with exactly what to do with Cato, because we don't really fit the traditional box mold of SD-WAN. And so a lot of our executive level conversations with them revolved around, the market is shifting. This needs to shift as well. I mean, digital transformation has become such an important component of people's business. And this isn't any different, right? Security is scary. The reality is it's scary. It's complex. It's not easy to manage and use. And people need a way to have that security, have that secure peace of mind, but without all the complexity. And that was a driving force behind a lot of this.
Well, perfect. Although I know everybody's riveted with our conversation, I think they're really looking forward to this next section. And this is Wolf Ridge's very own beer taste. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk about our first beer today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gary. All right. So I'm Kathy with Wolf's Ridge Brewing. We're located here in Columbus. We're a family owned and operated business. We're a brewery, a restaurant, and we also distribute across most of Ohio. And we've been here for about 7 years in downtown Columbus. And the way that we kind of like to do things is really pay attention to the craft of what we're creating here. So we do some unique beers, and we also do some really traditional styles like lagers and things like that. You guys all got a mixed six pack of 6 different beers. We're going to talk about 3 of those today, maybe 4 if we have time. And the first one that we're going to talk about is going to be Foreign Concept. So I don't know if you can kind of see that. There we go. Foreign Concept. We're going to taste that first. Before we open that up, though, I'm going to talk a little bit about tasting notes and how we taste beer and also other beverages as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that Foreign Concept. This is a peach lager. And if you notice, you also got some tasting notes with your beer as well. And those tasting notes, if you're not tasting right now, you can go back to these and kind of reference them and do a tasting on your own, if you will. My email is also on that paper, so if you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me after the presentation today. So the first thing that we're going to do when we open a beer or any other beverage is we're going to take a look at it and just kind of look at the appearance of it, make some notes there. And then the second thing we're going to do is smell that beer or smell that beverage. 2 quick sniffs, it's known as the bloodhound technique, or a long below the nose drive by, or kind of smelling as you pass it under your nose. The reason why we do that is 90% of what we taste is perceived through our olfactory senses. So those retronasal and orthonasal senses. Surprisingly, when people were asked in a recent poll what sense they would be most willing to give up, that was the sense of smell. And I kind of disagree with that, but that's just my opinion. So you're going to go ahead and smell it, and you're going to make some notes mentally. A lot of what we do perceive is going to be through memory. What we perceive as smell is also going to be through memory. So is that a fresh cut grass, after your dad mowed the lawn in the summertime? What are you smelling on that nose? Then you're just going to take that glass and swirl it around a little bit. And the effervescence, the carbonation of beer is going to bring forth some additional flavors and aromas. You'll notice that when I'm tasting or drinking this beer, I'm using a glass that tapers towards the top that helps with to promote some of those aroma that that's going to come forth. And additionally, it's not a frozen glass, so that's going to mute some of the flavor. So you go to a bar sometimes and they give you a frozen glass. Like I said, that's going to mute some of the flavor. It's great for like a light American lager. That kind of, there's not really a lot of flavor profile going on there, so it's not too bad with those. But if you are drinking something a little bit more complex, you're going to want to have that kind of a little bit warmer glass. So when you take that sip, what you're going to do is you're going to bring forth some air as well. So you're going to kind of aerate your palate and just get that air in there, and you're going to swirl it around in your mouth, coat all of your mouth, all of your the sides of your mouth, your cheeks, the back of your throat. All of those are going to have taste buds on it, and all of those are going to have taste buds. Bitter is not necessarily in the back of your throat. Sweet is not in the front, or I'm sorry, tongue. Sweet is not in the front, like I grew up with that tongue map. That's been debunked. It's kind of dating me, I guess, a little bit, but that's all right. So you're going to go ahead and take a sip, and you're going to swirl it all around your mouth, and then you're going to swallow it. A lot of times when you're tasting wine or something like that, you don't have to swallow. There's no carbonation in wine, so that's not going to be an issue as much as when you're drinking beer or any other carbonated beverage, because that's going to bring forth additional aromas and flavors. All right, so enough about how to taste. You do notice on your tasting sheet that all of our beers have a degree of complexity listed by it or below it. And that is basically what it sounds like. It's how complex that beer is. And so you're going to want to taste beer in order of complexity. So something that has a lot of, a darker malt profile or a higher ABV, you're going to want to taste those later so that you don't oversaturate your senses. So we are tasting Foreign Concept. So this was meant to be just a regular light lager. We had, as a craft brewery, a lot of the bigger breweries, you just basically press buttons and that beer is made. The brewers never actually go in and mill the grain or add the hops or anything like that. It's all automated. So one fun part and kind of risky, if you will, part of craft brewing is that we do that all ourselves. So we create the grain profile and we mill all the grain in. If you make a mistake and you put one of the wrong bags in, it's completely going to change the flavor profile. Another nice thing about being a craft brewer is that we make a lot of unique things. So we can kind of change on the fly if we need to. So this beer was sitting next to, it was just a regular light lager. It was sitting next to a Saison, and it was supposed to be a peach Saison. Well, the brewer added the peach to the wrong vessel. So then it became a peach lager. And like I said, it's kind of risky, but we tasted throughout the process. And what came out was actually very delightful, really nice, flavorful, a lot of fruit flavor with it. The hops that we used are known for being kind of citrus forward. So it really went well with the hops that we had used. And then also, the crisp, dry finish of a lager. So lager versus an ale is dependent upon the type of yeast you use. And one of the byproducts of lagering, it's going to take longer, and it's cold fermenting. So it's going to get a nice, crisp, dry finish to the end of it. So this worked out really well for this beer. So that's a little bit about foreign concept. Like I said, we can do comments and questions at the end too. I can hang around for that if you guys have any of those. So cheers, back to you guys.
Perfect. Thanks, Kathy. That's awesome. All right, now back to the next question. Did we have questions from that first section, Larissa, or do you want to wait till the end?
We do have one question, if you wanted to answer that. It said, can these services be separated? I'm not interested in SD-WAN, but can I still leverage the security aspects of the product?
That's a terrific question. So when it comes to Cato, right, we can kind of layer on, sort of similar to that beer, we can sort of layer on different pieces as we, as the customer needs, right? So I can layer on VPN, I can layer on the advanced security, I can layer on the SD-WAN aspect based on what the requirements are. So that's one of the cool things about doing stuff in the cloud, is that I have a lot of flexibility there. And the great thing about it is, let's say you're in a situation where you've already got security. You're dealing with some product that you've already got, Palo Alto or Fortinet or whatever at the edge, that solution hasn't deprecated its value yet. We can leave that in place for the time being, leverage the cloud for the routing and optimization. And when those devices come up for renewal, the great thing about the cloud is, for me, it's a checkbox. If I go and add the security features, I enable them and we're done. So it's very, very seamless and easy for us to transition to and from if that's a requirement. Great question.
I see what you did there with the beer tie-in, Jerry. That was clever.
Occasionally.
Great. Okay, let's get into the weeds a little bit, Jerry. Can you elaborate on how you deliver the solution at a high level, at least?
Sure. It can be delivered in several different ways. And obviously there's a lot of moving parts. This is a pretty complex slide, but I'll try my best to, at least from a high level, get into some of the weeds on some of the different pieces. First and foremost, on the left-hand side, you can see that there are two boxes that are connected together, and they're also displayed as being a branch in a data center. So natively out of the box, Cato has the capabilities of putting one of our own edge products at your office location that will then form tunnels back up to the cloud, leverage the cloud to be able to route traffic between all the sites. As I mentioned before, if you've already got an existing investment, we can utilize an IPsec tunnel. So people that aren't familiar, I can basically create a VPN between a third-party product back into the cloud. So it's been very, very convenient. As we talk about the pandemic, the fact that people can't get to their sites, they want to be able to leverage a solution like Cato. We were able to creatively come up with ways to get them onboarded into our architecture quickly, because we had the flexibility of having that IPsec. And then as we move across the screen there, you get over to the right-hand side, you see the client slash client list SDP. This is our VPN solution, right? So zero trust architecture. So we can be very, very secured with those resources. Great thing about that is that our mobile client connects into our POPs the same way as our sites do. Those are going to connect to the POP that's closest to where you're located. And the value in the case of the mobile is, because you're connecting to the local POP, you get much better performance than a traditional backhaul VPN type solution. Moving up a little bit, you see we've also got some capabilities around like Amazon and AWS being able to create like virtual instances of our solution. We can actually, in a lot of scenarios, replace like direct connects or express routes because of the way that we're able to optimize the performance. And then we can also create policies where, as we go back over to the left-hand side, we've got all these different as a service providers, whether it be software or infrastructure or even UC as a service, we're able to create policies through that cloud portal to optimize access to those different resources. And then obviously layer on advanced security on top of that, right? Whether it be firewall or URL filtering, or even some advanced features like anti-malware. We have a next generation anti-malware, which is like a threat hunting and threat seeking, as well as an intrusion prevention. And again, that's all embedded in the cloud, and it's all managed by my NOC and SOC teams on the back end. So you as a customer get to leverage the technology, but you're not responsible for maintaining it. You build your policies, you don't have to worry about updates and signatures and false positives, because Cato takes care of all that for you.
That's great. That's great. Next question. A lot of customers are talking about moving applications to the cloud. They want to keep performance predictable, but as secure as within their own four walls, which is kind of a challenge, as you can imagine. How does Cato and SASE accomplish this predictability and maintain security?
So you can see on the screen, right? We have a traditional connection or a traditional way that a customer would get access into like an AWS or Azure, or even anything as a service, whether it be like Office 365 or Salesforce or RingCentral. The challenge that they run into is that with a traditional SD-WAN solution is that traffic, once it leaves your network, goes on the last mile providers up into the internet through the last mile provider, but it's going over an unpredictable medium. So we don't know what's going to happen on the internet. It's the wild, wild west. It's unpredictable. We can't really say exactly where the traffic's going to go, how effective it's going to get from point A to point B. We definitely don't have any visibility into it. So how Cato's structured differently is that all of your traffic routes up to our POPs. And then from the POPs, we can come up with a predictable way of routing that traffic, whether it be to those cloud-based apps or even to like your as a service providers like AWS and Azure, through our backbone, where we have a 5 nines SLA attributed. Not only that, we get end-to-end visibility and end-to-end control. And I can even apply specialized NATs to use certain IP addresses to get into some of those services, like Salesforce as an example. And I can lock it down. So you have to be on Cato to get access to it and actually secure, concern. What you're used to having everything in your four walls. It's easy. It's predictable. You know exactly who's getting access to it, have visibility into that. When you go to the cloud, you love it because you have flexibility, but you lose security. So with Cato, we can incorporate some of that. And the great thing about the entire product, Gary, is that it doesn't matter what solution you go with. Since the those 60 POPs are already built out, I've already got architecture for whatever's next, right? You see on the top of my background, the network for whatever's next, right? The reality is it's really designed like that. Today you have RingCentral, performance is poor, you decide to go with something else. Oh, well, we can build a solution out to support it. So it makes it very flexible.
That's great. I love that. Well, let's take it then to more business relevant. So with all the recent events around the globe, what are some of the relevant business problems that you're seeing customers come to Cato to solve? Hit on things like the global capabilities, the POPs, the work from home, with COVID. Those are things we're seeing. Help me out with that.
So obviously having, it's kind of broken into two different pieces, right? So I'll start with the actual infrastructure. I've kind of alluded to it a little bit already, but we'll get a little bit deeper into the weeds. So you can see on the screen, this is the way that we have our solution architected today. We've got our own private POPs that exist globally throughout the world, all around the world. We have 5 in mainland China specifically. That's a terrific use case for us. We can really solve for problems there. Essentially, this is our own infrastructure, and in between all of these different locations is a redundant tier 1 provider backbone that provides our customers a 5.9 SLA. So any communication between any of these locations is all through this provider backbone, where it's secured, it's isolated, it's predictable. I know exactly what I'm getting. I have SLAs attributed to the connectivity, sort of like our own internet. It's our own private internet that we can predict. And as a customer, you get visibility into the traffic that rides over that you're not going to get once it goes to the internet. So that's one huge piece. The second piece is going to come around the VPN component. And I think we got another slide that showcases some of that aspect. All right, so as we talk about VPN, right? Traditionally, when you're dealing with VPN, customers have had like a concentrator that exists at one of their sites, or maybe they have a few of their sites, and then they have to decide, am I going to my resource in Europe? Oh, I have to connect to this firewall. Or am I going to my resource in the United States? Oh, I got to connect to this firewall. So there's not a lot of flexibility there. I got to kind of think through those decisions. The other challenge that they have is that as an IT admin, you have to make a decision. What's important to me? Is it securing the traffic? Because I'm now going to have all of my users' internet traffic come back to that one location and risk performance that's going to be ultimately affected because my applications reside there. And now I've got to support Brenda, the customer service agent, who's now got YouTube open and watching videos, that's consuming some of my bandwidth because I've routed it all back to that data center. Or do I want to split tunnel and just lose security altogether and just have no visibility into where they're going on the internet, things that they're clicking on? I can't secure them if a problem exists. So it's a toss up, and IT guys are really, IT people are really struggling with how do I overcome that? That has been a huge play for Cato specific to the pandemic, because we're able to leverage those POPs. We handle the responsibility of the internet traffic. So the traffic that comes to us, we look at it, we evaluate it. You use the security stack that exists in the cloud. So you can still add your advanced threat features. You can still use your URL filtering. You can still secure that traffic for your users, but you don't have to worry about the performance degradation because the traffic's no longer coming back to your office. Cato takes the burden of that performance off of the customer. We maintain it through our cloud, where we have scale and infinite capabilities, so that you just, as a business, you get the best of both worlds, essentially.
That's great. I could see use cases where people would be talking to you about just this work from home. What do I do with this much larger workforce going to their house now, coming into my network, and you have a solution already ready for it. So that's great to hear, and very applicable to what's going on in today's world. All right, now back to some more of the fun stuff with Kathy. Kathy, you're up.
All right, thank you so much. So we're going to get into our second beer here. This is going to be Daybreak, which is our coffee vanilla cream ale. Go ahead and pop that. And if you're tasting this beer, you'll notice that the first thing that you pick up on the nose is not what it looks like or what you may think it looks like. Just a really nice fresh cup of cold brew, maybe cold brew coffee, or some of that really nice, kind of a more expensive variety of coffee, if you will. It's really fresh. This is very unique in that the beer world, prior to about 2015, didn't really have anything like this. Anytime you would have a coffee beer, it would look dark in color and it would be a little bit more thick on your palate, if you will. The mouthfeel was a little bit more intense. And so what we decided to do, and what we like to do here at Wolfshire, is just play around a little bit. Some experiments are not really the best experiments. Once we had a purple beer after Barney, which tasted and smelled basically like rotten trash because of the cabbage that we used. Not our best moment. But yeah, so this is what we did is we took our cream ale. So cream ale was the most popular style prior to Prohibition. German brewers had come over and brought pilsners with them, really light lagers, and the beer drinking public here in America really took to them, and so American brewers needed a way to kind of come back from that and developed something called the cream ale. So cream ales are, as it says in the name, an ale. So an ale and a lager, like I talked about before. Lagers take a little bit longer to brew. Pilsners are lagers, and so they used an ale yeast which ferments at a lower temperature to create the same thing. So cutting down on the time a little bit that it takes to brew this beer, and it also has a good amount, about 40%, up to 40% of flaked maize or corn. So what that's going to do to the beer is you're going to have a really nice light beer, so really clean, like a lawnmower beer, or lawn mowing beer. If you will, and it's also going to have a little bit of perceived sweetness from that corn on it. So what that does for Daybreak is we take that beer, the cream ale, and we infuse it with One Line, which is a coffee roaster here in Columbus. We use their medium and light roast, but we use whole bean coffee beans. So you're going to maintain the same body and color of the cream ale as you would for a regular cream ale, but you're going to add that perceived kind of bitterness from the coffee beans, and also the aroma that you get on this beer. One of the things we do and why we do use the whole bean coffee beans is you also, when you grind coffee, you get a little bit more of that bitterness. So you're not going to get all of that. You're going to just strip the oil. So you're going to get the aroma and the flavor that you want off of those beans. We also add Madagascar vanilla beans, which is going to add a little bit more perceived sweetness to this beer. It is going to maintain that balance that you want. So you're not getting too much of the bitterness. Just really nice if you were to have use some cream in your coffee, you're kind of getting that flavor on it too. So like I said, it's not going to overwhelm the senses too much. It's really interesting, and it's not going to really fill you up like a heavier beer would either. So this comes in at 5%, so you can drink a couple of these. This is actually our best-selling beer. So it started out as a keg infusion, and we were like, let's see what happens. And then people really, really kind of took to it. And like I mentioned, we've been brewing this since about 2015. And we entered it into the Great American Beer Festival, which is basically like the Emmys or Grammys of the beer world. We entered it into the contest there for the coffee beer section ever since then. And for years, we never got past the first round. It was basically like, this is weird, but we never changed the recipe on it. And so in 2019, it won a silver there for coffee beer, and in 2020, it won a gold. So we like to say that the beer world is finally kind of caught up to us, but it's a little biased on our part. But yeah, so this is Daybreak, and I hope you guys all, if there's one beer that I suggest that you try of ours, this is definitely the beer to try. It's interesting, and even for people that don't like beer, and personally, I'm a tea drinker. I don't even drink coffee, but this is definitely an interesting beer. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick it back to you guys, and cheers.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathy. Larissa, did we have any audience questions during that section?
No questions right now. Thank you. Perfect.
Well, being from Parallel and what our focuses are, Jerry, this question had to be coming. Can Cato's platform help customers looking at UCaaS and CCaaS?
For sure. Again, another terrific use case for us, and something that we get challenged by quite a bit, right? So there's a few different aspects to this. I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I can bring it back up again. We talked about the POPs and the fact that the POPs exist throughout the world. At each of those POPs, we basically have private direct peering we have private direct peering with all the different as a service providers. So the reason why that's important or adds a lot of value to the conversation is that we have the 60 plus POPs, 25 or so in the continental US. And we're strategically aligned with a lot of the as a service providers, specifically the UC as a service providers. At the edge, when you have redundant connections, we can do traditional SD-WAN functions like packet duplication, which is important with voice because we know it can be sensitive to latency and packet loss and jitter and whatnot. Well, we are able to replicate that traffic over both paths at the same time. And this is encompassing of internet-driven traffic too. So even as going to like UC as a service providers, we can still replicate that data. If one of the paths were to be degraded, have an issue, it doesn't matter because we have the replication of the data on the second path. And then on the back end, once the traffic reaches the POP, I can create policies to privately route that communication through that middle mile where I have an SLA and end-to-end visibility directly to the data centers where those services reside. And then once I reach those data centers, I have that direct peering arrangement. So I can get 1 to 2 milliseconds of latency directly into those services and can transform the way that they function and they work. And plus I can see exactly who's using it. And it doesn't matter what you pick. That's the cool thing too, Gary, right? As you're talking to having these conversations with your clients, the challenge that you don't want them to build an architecture that's going to be pigeonholed into a specific solution, right? There are a lot of them out there. You pick this network, and the reason I pick this network is they support this SD-WAN or that SD-WAN. Well, what happens if that provider doesn't work out. You need a solution that's flexible. And that's what this is going to offer you. Is it doesn't matter what direction you go, the backbone allows you to be able to transition regardless of what the scenario is.
That's a great point. You know, I've spent a lot of my career talking to people about moving to the cloud, and it's not if, but when you go to the cloud, and then defining what that means to an executive, depending on the different applications. Well, a rendition of that as you're already in the cloud is now you're going to choose different partners in the cloud. You may have went to the cloud with this one platform, this one technology, this one provider, and then you change. And so it's good to hear, like you're saying, this is future proofing when you make those changes down the road potentially. That's great.
It's protecting you too, right? You're not in a position where you're kind of stuck with that existing provider because you know that it's going to cost you. You don't have to do an uplift on all of your hardware to be able to support it. So you're positioning yourself in a way where you're protected and you can make pivots quickly.
Yeah.
Transitions the way that you can conduct business.
That's great. That's great. So who primarily competes with Cato? And in that space, what sets you guys apart?
There's a lot of vendors in the the SASE space specifically, or starting to come into the SASE space. Realistically, they don't do a lot of the same things that Cato does, and we've got a number of them listed here on the screen, whether it be VeloCloud, Cisco, Palo Alto, Zscaler, Fortinet, or Open Systems. Each one of them kind of has a different flavor, a different way of doing it. Right off the bat, they're not a cloud native architecture, right? So they're taking edge-based products. I think it was said best by the gentleman from Zscaler that said, Blockbuster can't take a DVD player and stick it in the cloud and say that it's Netflix. And I think it's a really telling way of looking at it, right? At the end of the day, when you're building something out for the cloud, it should be designed for the cloud. It should not be designed for some other thing. And you know, as a kid, you learn that you can't stick the square peg in the round hole. And this holds true for everything we do in life. So as we look at these different products, you can see that there's a lot that have some deficiencies. I mean, there's elements of SASE that Cato is still working to incorporate themselves, but in terms of SASE and the strategy, the way that we look at it is we're the most complete solution on the marketplace. We are converged, which pretty much excludes everybody with the exception of Fortinet and Open Systems. We are cloud native, which excludes everybody with the exception of Zscaler. Everybody's trying to move stuff to the cloud, but they're not natively designed for that. We have global POPs that are all interconnected together, and some of the other vendors can incorporate some aspects of that, but they have to rely on other providers to be able to support that. We are all edges, meaning that we don't have to rely on somebody else's hardware. We can do that if it's needed, but we don't rely on it. And that's like the shortcoming of like a Zscaler or like a Palo Alto, where you need to use another solution in order to incorporate it. Palo Alto obviously did the acquisition of CloudGenix, and it's kind of allowed them to extend that out, but it's taking two products and trying to kind of jam them together and say that they're one. And then we have unified management. It's all right through one single cloud. There's not multiple UIs that you have to learn how to manage and support. It's all through one seamless dashboard that's easy to configure and build out.
That's great. You know, I feel like, SASE's so new and everybody wants to be the latest and greatest thing. So I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of people are trying to play catch up where you guys are already there. So for our next question, these other ones I'm talking about are coming from the SD-WAN space and trying to mature into the SASE space. But what about SD-WAN space itself? You know, what are the unique qualities to Cato compared to the competition in the SD-WAN space specifically?
So before we do that, right off the bat, a good way to transition this, Gary, is think about it like it's a coffee beer that is a cream stout and kind of ahead of its time and didn't win the award for a while. So I think that's a terrific way of transitioning this over. But talking about the SD-WAN, right? We are able to incorporate all of the different aspects. And that's the great thing about it, is we can replace MPLS if customers have that as a requirement. We have global connectivity, so it doesn't really matter where you're getting connected in. We have the capabilities to supporting it no matter what. We can secure those DIA type connections, right? And have firewall features, which is obviously a lacking component of a lot of different SD-WAN solutions, is that they don't have the availability to do that. We can optimize cloud access. So we have that global backbone. So unless you're looking at a global backbone provider that's missing all these other aspects, you can't have a way of easily doing that. We have mobile access. That's a huge piece that's missing from a lot of SD-WAN providers.
Mhm.
Customers are stuck doing like VPN concentrators to be able to support those mobile users. This is all baked into the solution. It makes it much more easy to manage and support. And then the last, but definitely not the least, is going to be that unified management. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have an easy way that every person that's supporting your environment can go in and quickly get ramped up and understand how to use the product that you're using to support your business, and you have all these different pieces and you got to wait for Joe to call you back because it's after hours and he's the only one that knows how to do the firewall, you're left in a position where you're never going to be able to fully properly support your network. And that's the biggest burden of business right now.
Right. That's great. Well, thanks for that. Well, Kathy, final beer. Let's get back to Kathy and the transition to Wolf Ridge.
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys. So we're going to talk about this last beer here, Sustinator, which is a Doppelbock. Before I talk about the beer, though, you may have noticed some of the beers that you guys have are over wraps of old cans. We're not trying to be cheap, but so what happened with the pandemic? You know, everybody was used to going to bars, used to going to restaurants, and enjoying themselves there, and obviously that put a very abrupt halt to a lot of things. And so one of the things that happened was, you know, many people switched to packaging options and, you know, buying at their grocery stores and from their local breweries and things. And that put a run on cans that we didn't anticipate. Well, we, being the can manufacturers, did not anticipate happening. So right now we're looking at about 6 months from order to actual receiving of the cans. So, you know, we were presented with a problem. And as we've done over the past year, you know, kind of pivoted in our business model and what we would normally not allow, I guess I'll say, but we got to, you know, we took an innovative approach and took some of the old cans that we had left over from previous brands and then wrapped them over it. So if you're wondering why these are looking like this right now, that's why. But yeah, so hopefully, you know, they've upped their production, so we'll get past this here in a little bit. But it's kind of been interesting how COVID has caused us to shift in many aspects of our business. All right, so Doppelbock. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of beer. Before we get into the Doppelbock, feel free to crack that if you want to and go ahead and start drinking it. The Doppelbock, like I said, so history of beer. A long time ago, in the between like 13 and 1800s, basically, before we were able to isolate certain bacterial strains, beer was more of a product of necessity. For a lot of places, the water was not potable. So especially in England, you couldn't drink the water there. So they brewed really low ABV, like 3%, 2% beers to make sure you weren't consuming bacteria that was going to be harmful to you. During the brewing process, we boil the wort, so that boils out any bacteria that would possibly make you sick. So really, technically, beer, unless you consume too much of it, won't make you sick, unless, of course, if you're gluten free. But you know, so yeah, you know that, and also sustenance. So in the 1300s in Germany, in Einbach, they started to brew Bock beers. And the people that brewed beer originally were typically the women at home, and you brewed it for your friends, your neighbors, your house, like I said, to make sure that you weren't consuming bacteria-laden water. This was the alternative to that. And then additionally, monasteries were big into brewing. So in the 1300s in Germany, the monasteries started to brew beer, and they were brewing Bock beers. And during a period of fasting in around the 1700s, you know, they started to brew Doppelbock, which is, as you could imagine, a double bock. And those beers were a little bit higher in ABV, and higher in ABV means a higher malt content. Malt provides the fermentable sugars for yeast to go forth and consume. That also increases the alcohol a little bit, but a higher malt content means that you're going to have more nutritional aspects to that beer. And so they thought that brewing and drinking beer during their fasting period would bring them closer to God. Obviously, Doppelbock, a double bock, is going to be a little bit higher in ABV. So I'm assuming that, they had something going there for sure. So yeah, so sustenance, we do, like I said, we do a lot of experimental beers, but we also do a lot of really traditional styles as well. And this beer is, as you can imagine from the 1300s, a traditional German style. What you're looking at is a little bit darker in color, but you still should be able to see through that beer. So you're going to get a little ruby brown notes to it. And when you smell it, you're going to get a lot of what you would assume, or what you would perceive as kind of bready notes. So the name Sustinator is basically liquid bread. So that's what you're looking at, and it is, like I said, a lot of nice malt derived flavors, notes that you're going to get on it, and also a little bit of sweetness on that. So like I said, malt provides the fermentable sugars, so those yeast go forward and consume that. It creates alcohol, CO2, and then also, you're going to raise the level of sweetness on it. There are hops in all beers, but we're talking about a balancing act depending on the recipe. So you're not going to get a lot of hop notes in there, but there will be some hops presence in there for balance, basically. Yeah, so this is Doppelbock. Go ahead and enjoy it. And, if you're fasting, this is a great way to do it. I guess we're past dry January, but yeah. So, so yeah, we'll kick it back over to you guys, and I'll stick around if you have any questions or anything like that. And cheers.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathy. Larissa, did we have any questions on that last section?
We do. We have one question. It says, the last slide mentioned ZTNA. Do you offer this type of complementary service to your SASE offering, particularly due to the quick influx of a remote workforce?
Yep. The great thing about our solution, right, since it's cloud driven, I can integrate in with Active Directory. I can integrate in with third-party SSO providers like Okta and Office 365. And when you go to build out policies through the cloud portal, it's very, very easy based on security groups, based on local users, based on VPN users, to build out policies to be very, very specific about what resources they can get access to. And since it is a full security stack, right, I can do inspection. And because I can do inspection, when I'm evaluating applications, I'm evaluating them at the app level, layer 7. And not based on the port. So you can be very, very granular in your control. You can do time of day routing, things like that, to be very, very specific about what resources users can get access to and how quickly they can get access to them and when they can get access to them. So terrific question.
Great, great. Well, here's our final formal question, Jerry. What additional services do you offer customers to help manage their solutions?
Sure. There's several different services that we can offer. Right off the bat, as you can see in the top left-hand corner, is our MDR service. So this is an additional complementary service to the advanced security features that we've got on the product. We have a lot of customers. We see all their data because it's already flowing through our systems. And we have these high-end NOC and SOC teams that are supporting the environment. And so what this MDR is, a service that we can layer on top of our security that's already preventing and doing corrective actions based on threats that we identify in the network. And the value of this solution is that you get millions and millions of events that exist in the system. A lot of customers don't have the flexibility and time that's needed in order to be able to go through all those different events. This allows us to put eyes on glass. It allows us to take one of our SOC engineers, evaluate what's going on, see if it's an actual threat, see if it's a false positive, identify what to do with it. And then we'll develop a runbook strategy with the customer where we actually sit down and say, here's what you got. Susie's got this malware. This is how you can go to take corrective actions. This is where we've identified it. This is how you can go about fixing it. So that's been a really big value add for a lot of the customers that we have. Beyond that, we have hands-free management. It's kind of another interesting solution, right? Everything you see with Cato is customer cannot manage it all themselves. So our entire cloud architecture, customer can do all the management, but we get plenty of requests for, I don't want to be responsible for the day-to-day management of this service. So that's what that hands-free management allows our customers to do is I don't want to be responsible. I just want to leverage it. I want to get the insight into what's going on, but I don't want to have to worry about figuring out how to make changes. And that's what the hands-free management does.
That's great for that smaller shop that may not even have an IT team.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a very easy way for them to be able to support it. So then we have rapid site deployment. It allows us to remotely engage with our PS team. So we've got several very strategic engineers that have a versed background in lots of different technologies that can work with our customers to take their existing environment, come up with a strategy, deploy the sites. We normally layer this on any service offering that we come up with. And Gary, you can obviously attest to this in the few engagements that we've worked on. The nice thing about this is we can do it in a shadow capacity. So I can do 2 or 3 sites. Let's say you had 10 sites. I can do 2 or 3 sites like this. That engineer will work with you. They'll get you familiar with Cato. It really gives you a leg up on being able to support the platform because you've got somebody that's walked you through it several times to get you comfortable and let you figure it out from there. Or if you just don't want to be responsible and you know that you're busy, you got to move the network over, you still want to support it after the fact, just pay us and we'll do all the deployments for you. So it's a lot of different strategies around that.
Yeah.
And then the last bit,
they really appreciate that flexibility. I know the different size customers we go into, you see both ends of that spectrum. People that want 100% control, are you going to be able to help me and so that I can support this down the road and do my own rollouts too? I have a full plate, I'm understaffed. Can you guys do it? And Cato's been very flexible on either end of that spectrum.
Yeah, and then obviously the last one on the list here is a DSE, designated support engineer. Cool thing about this, right? We've got round the sun support that's available with our solution. So it doesn't matter where you're at. We've got engineers that exist all throughout the world. Customers, traditionally this would be larger customers, but customers that want a tier 3 engineer that's intimately familiar with their environment, understands their business practice, how they do things, that's familiar with the issues that they run into, they can subscribe to a service where they get a dedicated support engineer through his regular hours of operation, say 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, that when they open a ticket, it goes right to this individual. He knows exactly what to expect. There's not a lot of interacting back and forth of, this is my environment, this is how I have it set up. Okay, explain this. You can cut out a lot of the nonsense and go right to getting the problem solved because that engineer is very familiar with the architecture of that customer's environment.
That's great. That's great. Well, I really appreciate that. But Larissa, did we get any questions during that last bit of section?
Yes, we did have one last question. With the hands-free offering, do I as a customer lose access to those services?
That's a terrific question, right? A lot of the MSPs that we will compete against or talk against, a lot of times what will happen is that they will lock the service down. They will say, if I'm doing the management, you cannot touch it. I want to make sure that you're never touching it. Great thing about Cato, we can do the day-to-day operations. We can make the changes for you. But if you're in a pinch and you decide you want to get in there and make a quick change, that's perfectly fine with us. And a lot of that has to stem from the way that we're designed and architected, right? The reason why that's so important is because this is our code. We created our application ourselves. Everybody is on staff. There's no third party anything when you're dealing with Cato. And the reason why MSPs get pigeonholed into those scenarios is that they don't have the level of control that's required to be successful at supporting that. We're set up and structured differently. So because of that, what gives us the ability to have that flexibility.
That's great. That's great. All right, well, Larissa, over to you.
Thanks, everyone. We don't have any more questions at this time, but if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to your Parallel Technologies account manager. We will be sending out a recording of today's presentation. And so thanks to Jerry and Gary, and of course, Kathy for the beer tasting. And thanks again for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.